Okay, well, I am really so delighted and excited to be here with everybody this evening. And I'm also deeply grateful to Phil and the whole Wellness Through Mindfulness team who has been doing this for, Phil said earlier, 10 years. And I just have been always really inspired by your commitment and desire to freely offer and bring mindfulness and meditation to our community. So I'm really grateful. And I'm also super excited to be here this evening to talk about two great loves of mine, which is mindfulness and the Enneagram. And we're talking about the Enneagram, we're really talking about personality and how those things truly together are the dream team in terms of our ability to have greater self-awareness, compassion, self-understanding, resilience. So I'm really super grateful for the opportunity to share a bit more about what the Enneagram is, why it's important, how it relates in with our meditation, mindfulness practices. So really what we're going to do tonight is that first I'm going to guide you in a meditation. And so we'll start with a meditation just to tune into ourselves, bring ourselves into this present moment. And then I'm going to talk to you about the Enneagram and what it is. And then we'll wrap up at the end with an opportunity for you to ask questions and have a discussion about it. So if it feels comfortable for you to do so, if you can just gently close your eyes. And at any point during this practice, if you feel you need to open your eyes and look around to ground yourself again, please feel free to do what feels comfortable and right for you. And to arrive here in our space together, I'm going to invite you to take some nice, long, slow, deep breaths. And really allowing yourself to fully inflate your lungs as you're breathing in and fully deflate them as you're breathing out. And as we're grounding ourselves in these long, slow, deep breaths, we have this understanding that we are signaling to our body, to our brains, that it's safe and okay to shift out of whatever fight or flight or stress mode we might be in and arrive at a place of rest and digest. And I now invite you just to let your breath return to its natural rate and rhythm. There's nothing to force, nothing to change, nothing to figure out. Just breathing in and out naturally through your nose. And with your eyes closed, you may notice that you're more aware of the sounds in your environment and just welcoming all the sounds that you're hearing. The sounds are never a barrier in meditation. And now bringing our attention and our awareness inside our bodies. And just scanning from the top of your head down to the tips of your toes. And just notice if there's any areas of tightness or resistance. And if it feels natural to do so, just allowing yourself to soften around those areas of resistance. And just noticing how your body is being supported by your chair. And allowing yourself to receive that support. I now invite you to bring your attention to the area of your heart area. And just notice how your chest is rising and falling over your heart. Almost as if you're breathing in and out through your heart. And we're just going to rest our attention on our heart area. And if your mind wanders to thoughts or sounds, just bow to your wandering mind and then gently bring your attention back to your chest rising and falling over your heart. We're going to finish our practice tonight with planting a question with a focus on your heart area. Just silently asking, what is my heart's desire? What is my heart's desire? Without needing an answer, just planting the seed of the question. What is my heart's desire? Just bringing your attention back into the space, back into the room. And when you're ready, you can just gently open your eyes. Okay, well, thank you for meditating together this evening. And we're going to start our chat about the Enneagram with a quote from the book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram. And this book is The Complete Guide to Psychological and Spiritual Growth for the 9 Personality Types, and it's by Riso and Hudson. And we're just going to start by warming up the discussion about the Enneagram and what the Enneagram even is. And actually, before we start with that, how many of you are familiar with the Enneagram? So not a lot of familiarity. Okay, great. Well, it's not great, but it's a wonderful opportunity for me to introduce it to you and try and do it in a way that's meaningful and relatable. Because like mindfulness, the Enneagram can be a very complex system, which makes it very rich and meaningful, but also can make it a little complicated. So I'm hoping my intention is to simplify it and also leave you inspired to explore it further. So what if there were a system that can enable us to have more insight into ourselves and others? What if it could help us discern our filters more clearly and take them into proper account? What if this system could show us our core psychological issues as well as our interpersonal strengths and weaknesses? What if this system did not depend on the pronouncements of experts or gurus or our birth date or our birth order, but on our personality patterns and our willingness to honestly explore ourselves? What if this system showed us not only our core issues, but also pointed out effective ways of dealing with them? What if this system also directed us towards the depths of our own soul? Such a system exists, and it's called the Enneagram. And I have to say, I just want to introduce to you how I was introduced to the Enneagram, why I feel it's such a powerful tool, a roadmap. And I had personally been, probably for the last 15 years, I've had a daily meditation practice. And I started, like many people, wanting to find ways to deal with my stress, deal with my cortisol, sleep better, help me regulate my emotions, all of those kinds of things. So those are the things that I was really drawn to meditation and mindfulness about 15 years ago. And I've had a daily practice pretty much ever since. And meditation and mindfulness literally has transformed, I would say, my life. I wasn't really doing it for that purpose. I was just doing it as a way to improve my health at the time. And what I really realized after I sat down for that first 5-minute meditation, which is all I could really bear to do because I was very resistant to this practice at the start, was I realized in those 5 minutes that I had spent a lot of my life being very distracted from myself. And in some ways there was an excitement about that I actually could sit for 5 minutes and close my eyes. And there was also a bit of a sadness and a curiosity about how much of my life I was literally kind of sleepwalking through life. And like most of us, at some point, there's something in us that kind of shakes us up or has us question, is this all there is? Is this the best version of myself? Can I be more peaceful? Can I be healthier? So I'd been meditating for a number of years, and I'd become certified as a meditation and mindfulness teacher, and those tools have been truly a lifeline through the ups and downs of life. So life is sometimes more at ease, and there's more moments of joy, and then there's been moments of loss and grief and pain. Like everyone, we have these moments. Meditation and mindfulness has been, for me, a constant companion, So I've been deeply grateful. But I was starting and I was teaching meditation and mindfulness, and I was doing some coaching with people, and I was starting to see patterns in people and starting to question, well, why are these patterns of how we basically suffer, or what it is that causes us more stress. And I was starting to see patterns that I couldn't really understand. Why are some people really stuck in their head? Why are people very caught up in their emotion? Why are some people very much, always doing things and have a harder time sitting? So I was starting to ask a lot of why questions. And at the time, just like it happens, is the teacher arose for me. And it was a mentor who had written a book about, she wrote this book for organizations about what motivates people. And I was really curious about, well, what motivates us? What motivates me? So I reached out to her as a mentor to work with her, and I was starting to explore with her these patterns and these questions about why, and meditation and mindfulness had really opened up a greater sense of awareness about some of these different ways of being. So at that time, and this was a number of years ago now, she asked if I was familiar with the Enneagram. And I think I had heard about the Enneagram, but like most people, I was very resistant to anything that felt like, okay, I don't want to be put in a box, and I don't want to be labeled, and I don't want, I've had through different careers and things, the Myers-Briggs and different personality typing systems. So I had been very resistant. But because of the context in which she shared it with me, and in the context of it, that it was truly, she believed, going to help me to understand and answer some of those questions I had, I got more curious. So just like I had got curious about meditation and mindfulness and started learning more and more different traditions and ways to practice it, and committing to my own practice, I started exploring the same with the Enneagram. And what I found was, as I got into this understanding of the Enneagram, which is basically a personality, a way to understand some of the common patterns and habits of our personalities, as I started going down that rabbit hole of the Enneagram, because like mindfulness, there's lots of different teachers, there's lots of different traditions, there's lots of different subtleties, but there are common threads. And as I started to understand more, I could not help but start realizing this awareness that the Enneagram brings, which really, when we talk about our personality, we're talking about kind of three core centers of intelligence that we have in all of us. We have our mind, our thinking mind. We have our heart and our emotional intelligence, and we have our body and our instinctual gut energy. So as I was learning about these three centers of intelligence and these 9 personalities, I couldn't help but think how much there was an alignment between what I had been practicing around mindfulness in terms of our relationship we have with our thoughts and our minds, the relationship we have with our bodies, the relationship we have with our hearts and our emotion. So I saw these kind of worlds really supporting each other, and so much wisdom and depth in terms of understanding. So it really has inspired me to integrate the Enneagram and our understanding of what that means into a mindfulness and a meditation practice. So that's basically how I got involved in kind of both of these worlds. And as I mentioned, the Enneagram is a personality, a way to understand those core energies of our personality that involve those 3 areas: our thinking, our feeling, and our behaving. And it shapes how we see ourselves, and it shapes how we see the world, and it shapes our relationships. And I think that was I know there was huge light bulb moments that I could have been meditating and meditating and meditating, but sometimes you can't introspect your way into seeing those things about yourself that sometimes you can't see. And so when I started exploring about, well, what is my core personality structure? So what is my habitual way of thinking, of feeling, of behaving? There were so many light bulbs around, oh, that's why I made these decisions. That's why I maybe had the struggle in this relationship. That's why I kind of went to sleep to my own agenda, my own needs, my own. So it really helped me to see, it helps all of us to see our patterns. It also helps us to have a deeper sense of compassion for other people, because we can both understand ourselves, but we also can understand that other people have different ways of seeing the world. They have different ways of processing the world. They have different ways of working with their mind, working with their emotions, so it was truly very enlightening to integrate this wisdom. The Enneagram helping us to see some of our habits more clearly, and those parts of us, like I say, that we go to sleep to, those things that we're subconscious, we're not aware of. And then the meditation, the mindfulness practice to help us be with that in a very compassionate, kind way, while also having the wisdom to say, this is how I am meant to evolve or grow in terms of my wholeness. Because the thing about our personalities, the thing that the Enneagram has taught us, is that our personalities, which is made up, as I mentioned, of how we think, the habitual way of our thinking, our feeling, our behaving, is who we needed to be to survive. It's this part of us, and we need to have a personality. It's like a turtle has to have a shell, but the turtle is not just the shell, and we need this personality to survive. It's one of our greatest gifts, but it also can become a very confining and almost a prison when we're not aware of it. But our personality, as we know through the lens of the Enneagram, we need to have that to survive. But it also often is what prevents us from fully flourishing, from fully coming into right relationship with ourselves. And it also can really obviously impact our relationships when we're not aware. So, and the other thing I would say about the Enneagram and understanding the Enneagram through the lens of how it relates to mindfulness is, I think one of the greatest, you could go down the mindfulness and the teachings and Buddhism, the depth and richness of that whole, both the practice as well as all of the wisdom around it. But one of the things I think I appreciated most about what the Buddha said was that, he basically said, well, don't necessarily take my word for it. Apply this into your own life. Does this help my life? Does it help me to suffer less and flourish more? Does it feel true? And if it feels true, wonderful. And I would say that would be the same as the Enneagram. I was introduced, does this feel true? Does this feel helpful? Is this going to put me in a box? Is this, all those same kinds of questions. So I would say the same as I'm introducing the Enneagram to you tonight is, does this feel true? Does this make sense? Does this feel like it's a meaningful exploration on your part? Because there are lots of different ways and paths up that mountain. and the Enneagram may or may not be something that resonates. So a parable I just want to share with you about a Sufi story, about a prisoner and a hidden key. And there was a man that was imprisoned in a high stone tower. And each day his wife visited him at the base of the tower, bringing food and water. And one day she brought him his prayer rug, saying that it might comfort him in his solitude. And he prayed upon it daily, pouring his heart into devotion and longing for his freedom. So weeks passed, and until one night as he prayed, he noticed a small irregularity in the rug stitching. When he pulled at the thread, he discovered something deliberately woven into the fabric. It was a tiny key. Realizing what his wife had done, he unlocked the door of his cell and walked free into the night. And that story really illuminates for us what the value of the Enneagram is. It is our habits of how we habitually think or habitually feel, habitually act, can become our prison. And awareness is truly the key to unlock that prison and to allow us to live with a greater sense of freedom. So being able to see the prison that the Enneagram map helps us to see. And then when you bring in the awareness and the practices that allow us to be with that is truly what unlocks that door to that deeper sense of freedom. And it truly is that knowingness is truly woven into the fabric of our lives. Our lives show us in many ways, through our health, through our relationships, show us maybe where we are not feeling as free. And but the answers are inside of us, waiting to be unlocked. So in terms of the Enneagram and what it is or where it arose from, so that the term the Ennea is a Greek term for the word meaning 9. And gramos is a figure or symbol. So the Enneagram is a 9-pointed symbol that represents 9 interrelated personality patterns and pathways of growth. And on your handout, you have that Enneagram symbol that shows the 9 different. And what's really fascinating about the Enneagram is this symbol has been found has ancient roots in Sufism, the Desert Fathers, Greek philosophy, Jewish mysticism, Buddhism, all have shown this symbol, showing patterns of pointing to inner transformation, inner change. So we have these ancient roots in all of these different traditions. And in terms of modern contributors, in the early 1900s, Gurdjieff introduced the Enneagram symbol to the West as a diagram of universal laws and transformation. So when it was first introduced, it was introduced as a symbol representing paths for growth and transformation, and it was not associated with 9 distinct personality types, although there is some indication that was even evident in ancient times. Then in the mid-1900s, Oscar Chazo linked the symbols to 9 ego fixations, creating the foundation for modern psychological and personality understanding. And then in the 1970s, Claudio Naranjo integrated Echazo's work with psychology and spiritual growth, giving rise to this contemporary Enneagram of personality. So where we see it today, we see it used in many different settings and increasingly in different settings. So we see it used by therapists as a way of people integrating it into therapy and psychotherapy. We see it introduced in terms of coaches, educators, mindfulness teachers, corporations, and depending, because it has a very psychological and spiritual kind of integrating both. But depending on how it's used, sometimes it's more of one than the other. For example, it's used in corporate settings increasingly because it helps people understand how to work together as a team. It helps people see, oh, that's the person's superpower, that's their strength, that's how they see the world. And that's this person's strength, and that's this person's perhaps limitation. So it helps people work together as a team, understand each other, and have a deeper sense of collaboration and understanding. And it's very, very powerful for that. And then we also see it used in terms of spiritual growth, because as I mentioned, and I'll talk a little bit about the spiritual part, those arrows show on the diagram, as well as the diagram, the image itself is very spiritual in nature, in that there's this circle, and the circle represents unity. It represents oneness. So we know unity and oneness is one thread of what is spirituality across a number of different traditions. It represents the law of three, which is just basic laws of the universe and how things work. So the understanding that creation unfolds through three forces: the active force, a receptive force, and a reconciling force. And so those three forces are represented in that very, what looks like a symbol, but is a very rich symbol. And the law of seven as well is another universal law around symbolizing growth, process, and change. So together these reveal that the Enneagram is not just a symbol of personality, although it is that, and it's very powerful for that. It's also a path of understanding how we get separated from ourselves, how we get separated from our deeper sense of ourself, and how we come back to unity, how we come back to wholeness. And we know in different, so it's a very powerful tool. One of the areas of misconceptions around the Enneagram, like I had, and many people have understandably, is that it puts people in a box. But what it truly does is help us see the box we're already in. So we are already in a box, and a box that is often for a number of different reasons. We're in a box from our personality, which is that habitual way of thinking, feeling, behaving. We're in a box as a result of conditioning, maybe cultural, gender. We're in these boxes. So really the intention, and where mindfulness becomes so powerful, is we can bring awareness to this. And as soon as we bring awareness, just the light of awareness on these patterns, the light of awareness begins the transformation. Not from a place of forcing change, but from a place of awareness, acceptance, kindness, which is what mindfulness teaches us, is to be aware, and meta-awareness, to be aware of what we're aware of. So we're becoming aware of our thoughts and our feelings, our emotions, and we're doing it with kindness and acceptance. And then with discernment, we can become aware, for example, there's certain Enneagram types, for example, that have a certain relationship with anger. So once we accept that anger and we can be with that anger with kindness, we can then wisely decide, or what are we going to now cultivate from here? How are we meant to use this to grow from here? So the other thing is a misconception is, which is very interesting, is that, for example, one of my clients was, say, what is called a type 1, or a perfectionist, or a performer, or reformer. And this type of a personality, as an example, has a very strong inner critic. Now, there might be some people in this group that can really relate to a very strong inner critic. And then there's others that might not. And I remember when she learned that she had this inner critic that was just so harsh on herself all the time. And when she learned that this was part of her personality structure, and then the question was, well, doesn't everybody have that same inner critic? And the answer is no. We all have times where we can be hard on ourselves, but we don't all have that personality structure, for example, that when you ask about an inner critic, a person would really relate to that. And it's so interesting that because that's the way we see the world, we don't necessarily understand that there's a way past that, or that not everybody sees the world. So it really helps us to understand that where we get stuck and how to unlock the key to that greater sense of inner peace, that greater sense of freedom. Okay, the other thing about how understanding our personality is really helpful is it's very interesting. Even when we look at the last number of years of research and meditation and mindfulness, which there has been an explosion of research. And I think that is so wonderful and so validating, and both when meditation and mindfulness are the benefits and also the ways in which we need to be very mindful and cautious as we're introducing. But the explosion of research has been incredible. But what's also interesting is we're getting to a place where there's more and more discussion about how we can personalize our meditation and mindfulness practices, how we can make a practice that is more personalized based on our needs. And I think that is also a place where these two levels, or the practice with the awareness of what our patterns are really helpful to how can I personalize my meditation or mindfulness practice once I'm aware of what some of these core habits are. So, as I mentioned, the Enneagram describes 9 distinct personality habits or ways of being. And what determines our personality type or our structure is what motivates us. What is the key motivation? So no, not what we do, but why we do it. And I have a list on your handout about the 9 core motivation types. So we have 9 different types, and they all have different names and different systems, and different teachers use different names, but generally they're similar. And it truly is about what motivates us. So why we do what we do, not what it is we do. So we're just going to very quickly go through these. So for example, the type 1 is called the reformer, and they're motivated to be good and to have integrity. The type 2 in the Enneagram is the helper, and they're motivated by being loved or to be needed. The type 3 is the achiever, and they're motivated by feeling valuable and worthwhile. The type 4 is the individualist, and they're motivated to be authentic and to be unique. Type 5 is the investigator, and they're motivated to be competent, to be capable. Type 6 is the loyalist, and they're motivated to feel secure and supported. 7 is the enthusiast, and they're to be happy and satisfied. And the type 8 is the challenger, and they're motivated to be in control and to protect themselves and others. And the type 9 is the peacemaker, and they're motivated to be at peace and to be harmonious. And it sometimes can be tricky to discern when you really start to pay attention about what motivates me. And for me, for example, for a long time thought I was the type 2, the helper. But what I realized was a lot of what that motivation was more related to gender conditioning, for example, about what is a good woman, how women are self-sacrifice, was more motivated by that than my actual core motivation. And it took me quite a long time. Some people will know right away that this is how they see the world, this is what motivates. Some other of us, it takes a bit longer to discern what is it that truly is motivating me. So for me personally, I'm a type 9. I have been motivated my whole life to avoid conflict and to keep the peace. And when I look at those decisions that I've made in my life that weren't always aligned with my deeper truth, they were my personality's way to survive. But there got a point where when you're motivated to avoid conflict, for example, there's a point where you start to lose yourself. You start to lose, who am I? So that's an example. Another example might be, say, a type 6, whose mind is always, for example, going to what could go wrong. There's the if this, if that, if. So they're trying to maintain that sense of safety. They're trying to predict the future. And it's really interesting when you'll hear even sometimes spiritual teachers or who will talk about practices that are really helpful for them, and because they'll talk about their mind of, they don't like uncertainty, and they have that what if mind and the doubting mind and the practices that have really helped them. But interestingly, the practices that might really help them are not necessarily the practices that are going to be paramount or most for someone else. So for example, a person who, for example, sees the world through the lens of a type 4 can be very comfortable with deep emotion and suffering. They have this, they're very comfortable with that. And we know not all of us are comfortable with deep emotion and suffering. Some of us are very disconnected from our emotions. So when we're suggesting practices to people that perhaps their path is to develop less identification with emotion, more equanimity, not necessarily feeling more deeply into what they're already feeling. It's like throwing, adding to a fire. So for them, their path to freedom is coming into a different relationship with their emotions than it might be with some of us that are very disconnected from our hearts, are very disconnected in our bodies. So it helps to really see these things more clearly. And I just want to share with you what Jack Kornfield says about personality. There are a couple of mindfulness teachers that talk about the Enneagram and integrate the Enneagram into their work. Like Susan Piver wrote a book about Buddhism and the Enneagram, and I know Dan Harris on his podcast 10% Happier has interviewed her about how these worlds have come together, and she's actually written a book. But Jack Kornfield wrote an article about, and he's a very well-known mindfulness teacher, I believe. He's the founder of Spirit Rock in the States, and he talked about personality in that he described it as looking closely at personality and temperament is like looking closely at the body. The human body looks best when viewed from an intermediate distance in soft light. When we look more closely, we see the pores, the teeth, the body hair, the shape, the blemishes. Even the youngest and most beautiful bodies can seem terribly flawed to their inhabitants. Observing the personality can be even more distressing. And he talks about when people show up in retreats, how sometimes most times they're come up close and personal with their different personality structures. But he also said, the good news is that we are not our personalities. And at times I think of the personality as a stubborn and demanding pet. We can train it to have better manners, but for the rest of its life, it will require a certain amount of affection, water, and kibble. It helps to have some humor in tending to this pet, whatever its quirks are. But once we recognize the patterns of personality, we can see them for what they are, simply different patterns of energy. So although I don't think I've read anything where he's talking specifically about the Enneagram, there's definitely this sense, obviously, as well, in the mindfulness world, which is all around paying attention with kind attention, developing awareness. So the other piece is, I just want to say, because it's like I mentioned, it's a very complex system that a person could, and they do, people spend their whole life studying the Enneagram. But we don't need to make it that complex. Just an understanding that we do have different patterns and starting to get curious about them is the beginning. And I actually, on your handout, there's a link to a blog that I wrote about introducing the Enneagram, a summary of each of the 9 types, and then a link to a free Enneagram test, if you're curious. And I would just caution, though, those Enneagram tests are maybe 60% accurate, because we're complex beings and we have a lot of things going on inside of us. And there's a lot of, history and gender and conditioning and personality and trauma and all sorts of things going on inside of us. But it does at least introduce an opportunity to start answering some of the questions, and even answering the questions will also can be eye-opening to go, oh, some people see the world that way, and I don't see the world that way, or I don't. So it's an interesting place to start if you're curious. And The other thing is just a couple of things about where these threes come into understanding these 9 personality types. And then I'll open it up to your questions. So of these 9 types, we have 3, all of us inside of us have 3 centers of intelligence. And these centers of intelligence are how we kind of perceive and make sense of the world. So these 3 centers of intelligence that I mentioned earlier are the mind, our thoughts, our heart or our emotions, and our body or our instincts. And we all, depending on our Enneagram type, we lead with one of those, and one of those becomes dominant. So we all have those centers of intelligence, which is what we work with in mindfulness. We work with our thoughts, we work with our emotions, we work with our body. But what happens is one of those becomes dominant, and it becomes like a 3-legged stool that's lopsided. And what I've really found to be, I guess, one of the most appreciative things around mindfulness and meditation is, even if we don't know our Enneagram type, even if we don't, believe that might be helpful, when we maintain a meditation and mindfulness practice, and I've seen this in my own life, I've seen it with so many people, we're naturally bringing those things into greater balance, into greater awareness, naturally. So I think about people will naturally begin to cultivate those 3 levels of intelligence and bring a greater balance, because we're intentionally paying attention to our thoughts, our emotions, our bodies. So we will naturally do it. So if I had to pick between, meditation or mindfulness or the Enneagram, I would have to say meditation and mindfulness, because it's the practice that we know that shifts our neural pathways in our brain. It shifts our relationship with ourselves. It develops compassion and helps us forgive, and all of those things that we will naturally then bring our personalities. But when we can be intentional about it, it's even more powerful. So 3 centers of intelligence, and we also have 3 instinctual energies inside of us. And I'm just sharing this because it shows how complex we are. So we all also have these 3 kind of animal instincts in us. And it's also helpful to be aware of that energy. So one of those instinctual energies is our self-preservation. Some people, and again, we get out of balance in these instincts. So some people, their self-preservation instinct becomes so great that it can start causing them problems. So their need for security, for comfort, for certain self-preservation becomes their dominant focus. The second instinct we have is a social instinct. We know we have this instinct to belong, to be connected to other people, to be part of community. And for some people, that is their dominant instinct. And again, the problem is not that we have these instincts, because we have them all. The problem is when they get out of balance and they become, and the other 2, about balance. And the third instinct is called one-on-one, or in a traditional Enneagram sense, it's a sexual instinct. It's the instinct of creation, the instinct of transforming through relationship. It's the instinct of that connection and creativity. And we all have these instincts. So that is Enneagram 101, although it's probably more complex than 101, but just to give a sense of it. And the one last thing before I leave you with a final quote from Jack Kornfield before we open it up for questions is, on your diagrams, you'll see how there's arrows. And what those arrows show is your path to freedom. So some of those arrows show where you might go in when you're stressed, which is very helpful. You'll have a place that you go in stress, and you'll have a place where you'll go where you're feeling more secure. And some of the teachings and thinking about, there's a part of us, one of those arrows is the part of us that is more our natural essence. The part of us as children that we had to leave behind in order to survive. So part of the Enneagram is a path, it's a map. It is, I need to go and integrate these parts of myself that weren't really okay, but are more natural about who I actually am. I need to integrate that into my being for wholeness. And then there's the path for spiritual or for growth, the path of evolving. And that's what those arrows show. And like I said, and like just again, reiterating kind of, it's only meaningful if it seems to make sense. But the more I've looked at it for myself, for the people in my life that I care about, I think it was very, telling when I had been married for like 40 years. And I really was like, I really didn't understand his core motivations, his person. And it was like this light bulb of, wow, that's the way you actually see the world. Or for him, to me, wow, that, you don't see it like that? It opens such an opportunity for connection and understanding and compassion that it's hard to really put into words until you actually work with the system and play with it and see how does this ring true or not in my life. Okay, so the final just quote, and then we'll open it up for questions. I know that's just so much information, and I apologize for so much information about it. So back to just wrapping up at least this formal part of it with what Jack Kornfield talks about as it relates to personality. So with acceptance comes compassion for yourself, trying to do the best you can on this human journey, and for others who are in the same boat. A wiser, more tender heart grows that can hold all the foibles and quirky sides of everyone's personality with some bemusement. We remember that who we are is so much more than the personality. We are the conscious spirit born into this body. We are the loving awareness that witnesses it all, beyond our conditioning and fears. Witnessing a personality with tenderness opens the gates to freedom and love. So with that, comments or questions and
I just, before we start with questions, I'd just like to thank you, Bev, for a very interesting, extremely interesting presentation. It was great. And also, Bev, could I just ask you, when there are questions from the audience, could you repeat them for the recording audience? Because they can't hear the questions out there on the recording.
yes,
Thanks.
of course, yeah.
There was a question over here?
Yeah, I did this a while ago, so
Oh.
thanks. It's great refresher, and then I stopped. But you didn't talk about wings. If I
Okay.
recall, there was wings, and
Okay.
I can't remember how they connect.
Okay, well, that's a great question. So someone just asked about wings.
Oh,
and where do the wings fit into the Enneagram. So again, the wings are another school of thought. Like, so some Enneagram teachers stress wings, some don't. But what the wings mean is on your Enneagram symbol. So for example, a 9 would have an 8 wing and a 1 wing. So it's the numbers on either side. And what that really means, according to some schools of thought, they don't all necessarily agree with this, but again, this is, pay attention to yourself. Does this ring true for you? But what that really is saying is, some of the thinking is, for example, a type 9 that has an 8 wing and a 1 wing, is the thinking is we tend to lean on one of those sides. So for me, if as a type 9, I would say I would lean on a type 1, which is more of the orderly, perfection, doing the right thing. So my type 9 is flavored by being more organized, more structured, more disciplined, which is a type 1. A type 8, which is on the other side, is a more, has more of a grounded energy of control, and that for me is very weak. My 8 in me, we all have all these numbers, but the lowest energy for me would be an 8. And like they say, it's kind of thought the first half of life is we have one wing that's more developed and one path to growth, as on top of those arrows. One path to growth is I need to learn more to cultivate that more powerful energy in me, which is an 8. So we need to balance out those wings. So that is one of the schools of thought. It's another path to growth, is leaning on those wings. Yes.
So I guess that would be a logical, sort of logical explanation, because all of these numbers are not all cut and dry. Isn't there some, movement or some, let's say, flexibility, or, because anytime we look at our actions, we could attribute all kinds of motives or reasons or whatever we have, and to me, there's always some flexibility. So I would say that we could borrow a little bit from either of the side personalities, because I don't think life is cut and dry, and I guess that's one of my not really objections but concerns, is that we tend to start labeling ourselves, and that I guess in some cases it's helpful, but I think in other cases it could be destructive and just narrow-mindedness.
Yes.
And unproductive. So,
Yes.
and I guess that leads me to the main question is how are we going to use this? And it almost seems to me that if we looked at somebody else's Enneagram, it would make life a lot easier, because then we would know how to work with that person, how to deal with that person, that sort of thing. And when I'm looking at myself, well, it's my own analysis, really, and I'm really just affecting what I think is whether that's right or not right. But if you start thinking about other people's Enneagrams, then that could be, I think, a little bit more useful.
Yes.
So I just don't know how you want to narrow that down a little bit. First the expansion on either side, and also the benefits of knowing our own Enneagrams versus other people's Enneagrams.
Yeah, so I think you were just commenting about a couple of very important key things about kind of the risk of labels, the risk of using a system that labels and has names like this and numbers and this, and I fully agree with you. So you mentioned about one of the great risks, and one of the things about the ethics, in a way, of using a tool like this, which really does, I think, require that commitment to ethics, that it's really important to not label people, to not put people in a box, to then use it as an excuse in a way, or so there is a real ethics around labeling, a real ethics, and really well-respected Enneagram teachers, and really are very adamant about the real mindfulness and being very mindful of not doing that, of not labeling, of not putting people in boxes, and really even, if somebody is wanting to say, well, what do you think I am? Like, to really not even go there, to help a person. It truly is about a tool, first and foremost, for self-exploration, asking ourselves, and we have to be very careful to not label other people. And so I think that's really key and really important, because there is a danger in doing that. And yet then your second point about
boxing ourselves into a
yes,
very specific category.
right. So it's like any tool. It's like any tool that can be very helpful. And like I have my kids and I have my grandkids, and I'm very careful, like, to not, well, I could talk about the Enneagram forever, as you hear. They really don't want to hear it, and they especially would not like to think that I'm, analyzing so if they're curious, I mean, they kind of get it through osmosis, So it is a tool, first and foremost, for ourselves and to understand ourselves. But when used ethically, and when we know that actually this personality is not who we actually are, it does create a deeper sense of a vision for freedom, and to be able to see ourselves more clearly. And when used ethically, it is a very compassionate tool with other people. And this really becomes also very important when it's used in corporations and teams, and the ethical use of it in those environments. So yes, you raise a very important question.
I'm also
Comment.
concerned about labeling ourselves.
Yes.
What happens if we made a mistake?
Well, if we made a mistake, leaving ourselves, I have to say though, I also have to say though, that there is going to be, probably once you start doing self-exploration, whether it's using the Enneagram, whether it's not, there needs to be a sense of compassion that comes with that. And there is often can be a sense of almost embarrassment of, wow, I did that. Like I was just coaching a gentleman who lives in a different country, so it could be any gentleman in the world, and he realized for the first time, because of his personality patterns that he really wasn't aware of, because until we become aware, we can't really see it, but the impact that had on his marriage, of being he was very much a social instinct and merged, and his whole world became his church community, and that had this ripple effect on a marriage, and that was purely arising from a personality that we're feeding this personality. And then there's a sadness that arises when you realize, for me, part of what was a sadness, that part of my letting go of my beloved nursing career that we were involved with was because of my personality. To go with the flow. I'll always make it work. Well, I went with the flow. So looking back, there's this sense of grief, like, wow, I would. So there needs to be, and like any serious spiritual and personal growth, there is going to be moments where we have to be so kind to ourselves because it's not always easy. The true spiritual and personal path is not, you see things that sometimes we don't want to see. But thank goodness we have our tools, like self-compassion, that we can bring to.
Bev, I think this is why it's so important, just apropos of your comment about labeling ourselves, it's so important that you brought in the whole aspect of mindfulness, because mindfulness is what offsets that labeling. Because when you label, you make something permanent. This is me. I am angry. I'm an angry person, and it's solid. But if you're looking at anger with mindfulness, with that mindfulness practice, you identify there is anger arising in me in this moment. It's not a permanent thing because, as you say, these conditions are all in flux. And so labels are extremely dangerous because they solidify something that in most Buddhist views, the world is not solid, and you use the word arising, and so this feature of my personality has arisen now, I identify it, oh, there it is. But you also observe it die away and something else pops up. But I think what Bev is trying to say is that over time you get to see, gee, this anger thing, it pops up a lot, and therefore I can now see that pattern in me, that it's not there all the time, it's not, as she says, who I am, but it's part of that turtle shell that I need to look at because it's destructive in other ways. So it's the mindfulness piece that offsets the danger of a label, because mindfulness recognizes that nothing that shows up is permanent. It's just something that is predominant in you in that moment, and then over time can be predominant quite a lot, but it's still not who you are.
Yes, that's really well said. Yes.
This fellow had a question first.
I just, so basically this is a tool for us to create self-awareness. When any of the 9 core motivations go off balance. So, my question is, isn't there like an underlying trauma that causes us to be off balance? And should we do like a root cause analysis, see maybe we should go back to the trauma that causes us to be off balance? And then show compassion, rather than showing us compassion but not knowing what's causing us to fall in that pattern repeatedly. Because I kind of do that myself, like I kind of see where does this pattern come from. And then when I go back to the root, that's when I show compassion and that's when I understand what I do. It's just
That's a very, I think, a really important question and observation about where kind of going to the root, and I think the thing about the understanding with the Enneagram is, the theory is that we are born with a personality. We are born with, and we can see that for those of us, that see in children how they come out with almost a personality. So the thinking is it's a combination of nature, nurture. So we're born with a personality, and then what happens to us after we're born then further impacts our personality. It further influences, and definitely, obviously, people's early experiences and trauma they've experienced has obviously a significant impact, and further obviously impacts the person's personality and experience. But the thinking is we are born with a personality, and in some ways it's why that really happens, that we're born with this, which kind of can separate us from our deeper sense of ourselves, and then we begin the journey of kind of returning to wholeness and integrating those different parts of ourselves.
If I can make a comment, I
Yes,
think that's
please
really,
do.
I mean, there's so many ways to look at this, but I think that's an invaluable aspect. We all are born with personality. We all have been conditioned by our parents. The personality that we've come into this life with is not something we're going to really be able to modify. Our conditioned wounding is something that we can bring awareness to, we can address, we can bring compassion to. And so I think that sort of looking at the core before the personality type, and I think that's an invaluable point, because I think it's a critical aspect in how all of us create our sense of self. And it's this moment-to-moment self-referential judgment that creates our problem. In a very simple way, it's understanding that we have a self that is temporary and ephemeral and not permanent and enduring. That is truly the segue to freedom from a Buddhist mindfulness perspective, not from the Enneagram perspective. But I just wanted to address that because I think it's really a very valuable perspective and insight to look at how we are and how that impacts personality.
Really good point.
So my question kind of came from what you said, which is, so if we identify ourselves, we do our little test and identify, is that something that can change or will change, or what if we will it to change or we want it to change? And then you talk about wholeness, so if I identify on here and I'm using mindfulness, like what wholeness, I think you're saying this is helping me to understand who I am and be compassionate to myself, but so I'm just wondering what this change thing, like can I change to another number?
Okay, good.
Do I want to?
Good question. Can you change to another number? So the thinking is, and again, this goes back to paying attention, or does this ring true with your experience? Does this feel? The thinking is we don't change our personality. So it's not like I am all of a sudden me who is, my personality is a type 9, the peacemaker, is going to become, a type 1. We all have all 9 of those energies inside of us, but we do lead with one, and it doesn't change in the sense of I'm not going to change and become a different number. But what we do notice and we do see and experience both with ourselves and in others is when we start to work with that, when we start to work with our core energy and our emotion and our bodies and our thoughts and we bring in those other parts of ourselves that to create a balance. And so we come into right relationship with those things. So we do change, just like we know we change from meditation and mindfulness. We change, our neural pathways change, the way we react, or say, for example, if our natural way might be to be angry, which isn't all personality types, we still will experience anger, but we evolve in that we cultivate the ability to be less reactive and more responsive. We learn to create that space. So we do change. We're always changing. We're always evolving, and we can cultivate things within ourselves. There are certain types, for example, that their greatest suffering, because each of the types is also associated with a core, what they call passion, and that's not in a passion that we usually think. A passion in this Enneagram world is the core thing that causes suffering for each of the types. For example, a type 1, a perfectionist, reformer type, the thing that causes them the most suffering is that sense of anger, bitterness, resentment that tends to be something that is their opportunity to come into right relationship with. And so once you know, I have within me this anger, this resentment, this bitterness that is there, that is impacting my health and my quality of life, now I can work with it. Now I can say I will bring in intentional forgiveness practices, maybe forgiveness towards myself, so we do change, and we change by cultivating, and it starts with awareness. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
But we don't, the other piece is, if it's really, it can also be very challenging to discover what your core type is, your core motivation is. The more work a person has done on themselves, like let's just say work kind of the more personal growth, the more they have worked with their experience or their trauma or their anger or their this, the more they grow, the more they evolve, and the more challenging it can be to get to what is my core motivation, because they've changed, they've evolved, they've grown, which is a very hopeful thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, great question.